Hello, BookTube. Well, as you can see, I have a guest, maybe two, and our subject is not explicitly books this time around, although plenty of books have been written on this subject. Plenty of them are behind me right now. Care to introduce yourself to my viewers?
Sure. Hi, my name's Nico. I'm one of the lead investigators here at the North American Bigfoot Center. I'm a paleontologist and a trained tracker and general nerd, I guess.
And you heard correctly, those of you who are listening, there was a word sandwiched in amongst all those qualifications, and that word was Bigfoot. If you couldn't guess from the gigantic diorama, you are a manager there. You're on salary, you told me. So
yes, I'm the manager. I run the museum. I'm also the guy that most people talk to when they email the shop, sending us footprints or photographs, or generally it's bones with me. I'm the bone guy here. And then the owner as well, Cliff Barrickman, who's famous for being on Finding Bigfoot and stuff like that, the TV show. Yeah, we're kind of the ones who run the shop here.
So you and Cliff have a rare distinction of saying that Bigfoot is your full-time job.
Yeah, there's not very many professional Bigfooters in the world, and honestly, I did not think that would be something I'd be putting on my resume.
No matter where you come down on the subject of the reality or not of Bigfoot, that is just about the coolest thing in the whole world. But let's talk about Bigfoot. I don't think we're going to cover any ground here that you haven't covered a million times before. But a lot of my viewers will not have covered that ground. And what we're talking about here, would I be right in saying that the center's approach to this is definitely naturalistic, that you are thinking about a large, heretofore unknown animal living in the remote forested wilderness of all parts of the world?
Yeah, so it's sort of like that. We have an approach here of not if they are real, but why they are real. Because we know they're real animals. The evidence they leave behind shows that they're just out there doing what they do. They're not teleporting or anything. They're not flying in UFOs. They're just regular animals that are out there doing what they do. And so our job here is to research how they are doing what they do and to educate the public on them so that it becomes less stigmatized. Because, I mean, as you probably know, there's a huge stigma behind the Sasquatch field. Yes.
And yet, Jeff Meldrum is not the only accredited professional. You're an accredited professional. It's not there seems to be a little bit more acceptance with time.
It's becoming more and more acceptable to talk about, especially, I mean, really it depends on where in the country you are. A lot of people associate the Pacific Northwest, where we're at, with Sasquatch, and it's fair. We've got the Freeman footage, we've got the Patterson-Gimlin footage, all of the original researchers like Grover Krantz and Renata Hidden and all them were here at the in the Pacific Northwest, so it kind of feels like a Pacific Northwest thing. But there's probably just as many Sasquatches over on the East Coast in the Adirondacks and down in Florida as there is over here. It's a whole species, and they're nationwide.
And we should specify here for the uninitiated that the Patterson-Gimlin film is the thing you will think of when you think of Bigfoot. That is the film footage that you will think of, which is 100 years old?
No, it's not 100 years old, but we did just have the 100-year anniversary of the Ape Canyon story, which is another famous story, but there's no film or footage associated with that one.
The Patterson-Gimlin film that's a source of a lot of controversy, right? There have been kinesthesiologist experts, anthropologists who look and say that is certainly not a suit. The technology doesn't exist today to make a suit like that, much less then.
Yes, there's a lot of professionals that look at it. Most of the people that look at it and say that it's not real are the people that don't actually look at the evidence. And a lot of the controversy surrounded a lot of people coming out and saying they were the person in the suit when the thing was filmed. And the only guy, I can't remember his name, unfortunately, the only guy that got pretty close to claiming he was the guy in the suit gave two different locations of where the animal was filmed, and neither of them were the right spot. In fact, the closest he got was about 100 miles away, I believe.
I remember a story, you must know it better than I do. Well, there are any other stories like this. I remember a story that may be apocryphal about someone showing the Patterson-Gimlin film to a Hollywood effects guy who had never seen it before and who said, wow, that's really great. They must have had a great crew. And he was then told, no, it was two guys on horseback. He said, no, if it was two guys on horseback, then that's a real animal, because they would have needed a crew. They would have had to been there for all of the day, maybe the night before. You would see evidence of it everywhere. There's no way that you could do this, ad hoc, just off the top of your head.
Yeah,
People
for
do
sure.
doubt it.
Yeah. So
People do doubt it.
the guy you're thinking of for that, he actually wrote a book. So this is pretty good for your viewers, I guess. It's called When Roger Met Patty, and it's by man, I'm doing bad on names today, but
Me too, and it's my job.
Yeah.
But Patty is the name of the animal in the film, and the reason why is because it's obviously female, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's called Patty, because it has huge pendulous breasts.
Yes. Yeah, which is really funny because a lot of people associate Sasquatches with one animal and they call it he. He's a Bigfoot, but he's the Bigfoot. But in reality, it's a whole species. And the one, actually, probably both of the really good footages we have, like the Freeman film, for example, which for your viewers is the video where the animal walks across the trail and brushes past a tree, and the guy filming goes, "Oh, there he goes." That's the Freeman film. Both of those are female. So
yes, the Freeman film has the suggestion of an infant.
Yes, has the suggestion of an infant. And the tracks associated with that individual are also within the range of female footprints.
And again, the person taking the footage, he doesn't exactly give the impression of being a $70,000 a year Hollywood scout. It seems like he's filming something that he's actually watching.
Yeah.
But okay, but there are going to be plenty of skeptics. You probably get them all the time, right? Yeah. Those skeptics, would it be fair to say that despite having at least those two pieces of film and whole football fields of tracks that can't be anything else, of track experts saying, look, this has dermal ridges, this is obviously not a prop you buy or make, you would have to know anthropology to make this, despite all of that, would it be fair to say that the reason why there isn't a Bigfoot center like yours at every major university in the world is because there is no body? Would that be fair to say that the 90% of people who still have a huge question mark over the subject are only going to remove that question mark with a body, dead or alive?
Yeah. It is fair to say. And I want to back up a little bit with that question there, because this field, unfortunately, because of the skepticism and the hoaxing and all that, it has made it very hard for professionals to actually look into this stuff without being, cast aside themselves. And so that's why the stigma is just getting worse and worse and worse. And so what I like to say when I'm talking to people who come in and are skeptical about all this stuff is good. It's good to be very skeptical, because it's the most of the stuff that people have access to, things that are on TV, things that are on YouTube, no offense, but all of these regular public access things, anybody can post these things. And there's so much misinformation out there about these animals, and there's so much bad TV about these animals that people don't know what to think. And so being very skeptical and not believing in something, and I also don't say I like to believe. I don't believe in Sasquatch. I'm convinced, because I've looked at the evidence and gone all the way down and done the investigations, and I eventually ended up seeing one last year. So they're real, but it's good to be skeptical because there's a lot of fake junk out there.
But in your line of work, right there on the front lines, I mean, you're on the highway, right? So if some family has been camping and they have had a weird experience, something they know they can't explain, and they drive right by you, they might speak. How many times in your job have you seen people's faces go white when they look over your shoulder and say, well, we didn't know if this was just, a curiosity shop or a tourist trap or whatnot, but we saw that. That is what we saw. We don't have any words for it, but that is what we saw.
Yeah, it's happened a few times. One of our favorite ones, we actually have a membership for the museum here that shows people what we're doing. We film everything we do, and we make these little documentaries to show people and keep people up to date with the information we're gathering. We had somebody come in, this giant bodybuilder dude, who up in Washington, actually, about an hour away from here, ran into a Sasquatch. He was driving his car home late one night, and one ran across the road in front of him, and he swerved out of the way, and then it was standing in front of his car in front of the headlights, and it screamed at him in a very aggressive way. And his dad came in here to report it to us and got him in here. And this giant dude, right? My boss Cliff brought him back here to compare it to Murphy here, and Murphy's pretty good. He's pretty close to what these things look like. And Cliff is kind of describing that, and he's talking about, where it was made and all these features, and he turns and looks at the guy, and the guy's just like frozen and crying because he was so scared of that thing. So yes, it happened. It happens, and it will happen again, I'm sure.
So I have to ask, why are we talking about tracks and eyewitness accounts? Why aren't we talking about a body, dead or alive? We're talking, I mean, you are in Clackamas County. That is ground zero for these things, and has been for 10,000 years. In all that time, no curious adolescent who wanders into a bear trap, no doddering elderly member that forgets their wits and stands in front of people who have cameras, and and bones. In all that time, it seems to me that in order to account for the lack of a zoo specimen, I hate to put it that way, but in all that time, it seems to me the only way to account for a lack of a zoo specimen would be either a giant anthropoid species that is wary enough of humans to understand how to cover its tracks, or feral humans. But feral humans, I'm assuming you would rule out because of the sheer dimension. I mean, every single account of this thing mentions that it's at least 7 feet tall. Sorry, I'm batting around all these possibilities because I've got an actual expert here. So go ahead.
It's all good, man.
Tell me. Well, you can't speak for the nature of reality, but tell me why we don't have a zoo specimen.
Well, there's a lot of reasons. The first reason goes back to that last question, which I realize now that I kind of danced around the no body thing, and I will get to that, I promise. That was not on purpose. That was an accident. But there's not a lot of academic research in this. You did mention Jeff Meldrum, and there are some other scientists in academia that are kind of keeping an eye out, but they're not putting their necks out there like they should in order to get this really, really figured out. And they're just kind of like watching from the sidelines and waiting for something, which makes sense. I don't blame them for that. But
otherwise they'd be that kooky Bigfoot guy.
Right.
So you're saying that if the similar amount of evidence existed for 4-footed ungulate, they would be out in the field.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's because of the stigma, and unfortunately, all of the stuff that happened in the past with hoaxes and people not knowing and stories and stuff like that. If we had this much evidence to fill up a museum back in 1967 when they filmed Patty, I think it would be a different story today. But we didn't. And it's because they're incredibly rare animals. Dr. Grover Krantz wrote a book. It's called Bigfoot Sasquatch Evidence. We actually sell it here at the museum. It's really one of the best books. And in that book, he talks about an estimation for how many Sasquatches there are in an area. And so I can't remember if he uses Oregon for the example or if we did the math and we do it for Oregon, because the Oregon is the example that I know. But in Oregon, we like to use black bears as an analogous species. I used to teach wilderness survival and tracking and all this stuff. And while I was in the woods, over my career there, I saw maybe 3 black bears. 3 total. And there's 30,000 of them in Oregon.
30,000.
Yeah.
30,000.
Doing the math, that I can't remember the math off the top of my head, but doing the math, that means there's probably like 300 Sasquatch in Oregon, plus or minus, right? So they're very, very rare animals. And so why we don't have a zoo specimen is because the academic, I'm dancing around again because I'm excited and getting all busy about this.
I get the same on the subject.
Looking at what I like to say to people who come into the museum is like, okay, so you don't have research funding to go do this, right? To go catch one with the proper gear and all that. And people are like, well, why don't you just go get a tranquilizer and go shoot one that way? And it's like, okay, so random citizen, go to the vet and ask them for horse tranquilizer so you can go catch a Sasquatch. And then we start to get into the nitty gritty of that, where it's like, okay, so with tranquilizer, you have to know the exact dosage. You know, if you do too little, you're just going to piss the thing off. But if you do too much, you're just going to kill it, which in this case, you'd kill one and you'd have a body, right? So in that case, it's fine.
You'd have a body, and there's a wide open question of whether or not you'd be guilty of homicide.
There you go. Right. It's also, it may not be illegal to shoot a Sasquatch, but it is illegal to shoot an idiot in an ape costume.
Well, or even if it weren't an idiot in an ape costume, even
right,
if it's genus Homo.
Yeah, which I don't think it is. Looking at the morphology of these animals and the way their feet move and the potential and like looking at all of the footage and photos and stuff we have, because there's a lot more footage and photos of these things than people realize, but we can't share them because the people that own those photos don't want them released. And so as soon as there's academic acceptance of these animals, there's going to be a flooding of photos out to the public showing these animals just doing what they do, right?
So the center has seen a lot of that.
Yes, we have.
The public has not seen.
The public has not, and unfortunately, I hate that I can't share it, because some of these things is like, there it is, there's a Sasquatch right there. But looking at their morphology, one of the biggest features other than the feet on Sasquatches is if you look at the top of their head, they have a kind of pointy head.
Big conical ridge, like a gorilla.
Yeah, the conical ridge. And so that implies that the animal has a sagittal crest, which in mammals is a ridge on the top of the skull, literally looks like a crest. And the muscles that attach to that crest on the skull impact the jaw strength of the animal. And so the larger the sagittal crest, the stronger the jaws are. And looking at how pointy a Sasquatch's head is, that would imply that they have a very strong bite. Now, that doesn't make them not human, right? There could be a human species that has that, but all of the human ancestors that we have discovered that are in the genus Homo do not have that sagittal crest. But there is an ancient hominid that does have a sagittal crest, and it's the start of that. If you look at the evolutionary tree, there was a split at one point in the Australopithecine line. This is where my paleontology is coming out.
I think I know the gigantic animal you're leading up to.
Right.
I do.
The Australopithecines are what Homo evolved from, right? So we've got like Lucy and Lucy evolved into Homo well, not Lucy specifically, but the Australopithecus and Homo habilis and blah, 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 blah. But at that split, where the gracile Australopithecines were, and that's what Lucy was, a gracile Australopithecine, we also had the robust Australopithecines, and those are the ones like Paranthropus that did have that sagittal crest. And so we are hypothesizing based on that and a couple of other things that kind of match up with Paranthropus and other robust Australopithecines, that Sasquatches are part of that line. So they would, because of that, be closer to us than chimpanzees would be, but they wouldn't be Homo species. They would be Australopithecines. And if you look, there's a really famous trackway called the Laetoli tracks in Africa. They have the same foot morphology as Sasquatches do. They're just that big, not that big, you know?
Dr. Meldrum is not the only person to point out that you would have to know an enormous amount to make some of the tracks that are cast. You wouldn't be just, a 61-year-old prankster with a big wooden foot on your boot. That would be some of them, but that wouldn't be all of them.
Right. We actually have a display here on hoaxed footprints, and we actually have these original wooden stompers from a famous trackway that hoaxed trackway that show why we can't just hoax them with wooden stompers like that. But I do want to go back to your question about why there's no body. And it goes back to
I didn't mean to be morbid, but I didn't mean to be morbid, but that's what people want. They want, I'll believe this is real when I see it in a lab. That's right. What I think. So,
and unfortunately, that is the case. And here we're not trying to kill them. I don't bring a gun into the woods whenever I go. I honestly probably don't even own a gun that's strong enough to take out one of these animals. But it boils down to this. So there's not very many of them in an area, right? So let's go back to that number, the maybe 300 in Oregon, right? Primates, which Sasquatch is a primate. It shows all of the features that other primates have. It shows all the other features apes have. So apes in particular, us, chimps, orangutans, gorillas, they're all very long-lived, right? They have very long lifespans. They're maybe 40, 50 years in the wild, right? Looking at that, they also do not give birth very often. And a bigger animal like a Sasquatch, that number is going to be extended, right? We're probably looking at a birth maybe every, I would hypothesize just right now without doing any math, maybe 4 to 5 years, if they're doing it every time, So looking at that and looking at their long lifespan and doing, I'm so bad with the math, but we do some math here and we're probably looking at 2 or 3 natural deaths a year of these animals dying from sickness or old age or whatever. They're also so big, there's probably nothing hunting these things. Maybe there were in the past during the Ice Age, right? When you had saber-toothed cats and American lions and short-faced bears and stuff like that. But right now, the largest thing they're going to have to interact with are grizzly bears. And there's not many of those around. And they've been seen chasing black bears. So they're kind of a top predator. I would hypothesize that cougars are probably taking young ones here and there, but I doubt it at the same time because young tend to stay close with mom and dad, So they're not dying very often. When a top predator like a Sasquatch or a cougar or a bear or a wolf, for that matter, dies in the wild, they do the same thing that our cats and dogs do. When they're dying, they go and they hide, right? And it's not because they know they're dying. It's because they think they're sick and they're trying to go get better without being in the way, right? And so that nothing can bother them. And so these animals, they go and they hide themselves and then they die and they're already in a hidden position. And the first things that are going to find those bodies are the rodents, the scavengers, the things that are built for finding dead things and cleaning up. Then, on top of that, I should also add that deer and elk eat bone. They do that so they can get the calcium that they need to grow their antlers. In fact, right over here, it's off camera, of course, but you'll see it if you come to the museum. We have a display called "Where Are the Bones?" and it shows an elk with a big old scapula in its mouth.
So you're saying in very little time, one of these skeletons could be picked to non-existence, not just picked clean, but completely reabsorbed into the natural world.
Yes. And so on top of that, on top of all of these animals that are going to come and eat it, Sasquatches live in environments that are built for recycling nutrients. They live in rainforest environments. And one of these, I think it was Les Stroud. I was watching a survival thing and for my survival training, and he was talking about one of his rainforest episodes. I think this was Les Stroud. It might have been somebody else. But when you're in a rainforest, it is actively decomposing you even while you're still alive.
I can attest to that.
Yeah. So Sasquatches live in these environments that actively decompose things and things are eating them. A big animal like that is going to be gone within like 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's not the same thing. People who've never been there, it's not the same thing as hiking in the Northwest, where you might say out of irritation, "Oh, these mosquitoes are eating me alive." But when you're traveling in a neotropical environment, it really wants to kill you. It does itself want to, your food. It wants just all of you.
It's a big digestive system.
Even so, you must get plenty of people who drive in. You must develop instincts right away for knowing, okay, well, here's Bob and Mary Lindell. They're from Cincinnati. They don't know anything about camping. They thought it would be fun. You probably can tell in 5 seconds whether or not they saw a bear, right? I mean, most people from the city have no idea how easily and how naturally a bear can stand on two legs. That alone would, in the gloaming just past the firelight, that would be enough right there, wouldn't it, for a lot of people? I mean, you must develop such diplomatic skills to let people down, to know right away, okay, well, this isn't going to be anything.
Yeah. No, I'm mean. I tell them, no, you didn't see Sasquatch.
No, you don't. You don't.
No, I'm nice. I'm kidding. I do. So the thing about my job here is we're always going to tell you the truth. We're always going to tell you what we think. And if we don't think it's a Sasquatch, we're going to tell you. I mean, 99% of my job is telling people what they found isn't a Sasquatch, you know? And yeah, and that's also one of the things you brought up, the misidentifying a bear. A lot of these people that say they're seeing these animals, they're probably not lying, but they probably don't know they didn't see one. There's this idea that there's so much hoax in the Sasquatch community that, and there is some for sure, but there's not as much as people think, but there is tons and tons of misidentification. And that's where people like myself come in, because most people, even Sasquatch researchers, proclaimed Sasquatch researchers who have been doing this for 30 years, come in and say they found a track, and it's not, you know? And it's because most of these people who are very versed in the woods, they're not training themselves in all of the other things. They're just looking for those Sasquatch things. So they're going to find things that probably aren't there a lot. Or they're going to see things that are there, but are something else and not Sasquatch. And so my job as someone who trained on everything else before I realized Sasquatches were real animals is educating people on how to identify these things. Like a good example is about 2 months ago, somebody brought in this pristine bear track, really, really good bear track. And it was a big bear track too. They brought it in, they showed me the picture, and they were like, look, it's a Sasquatch track. And I was like, oh, that's not Sasquatch, that's a bear track. And he goes, well, I can see why you'd think that, because it was on the side of the road and you can't see the heel coming off. And I went, okay, I could see why you'd say that, but here's all the other reasons why I know it's a bear track. And I taught him how to identify a bear track. And as he looked, he went, oh yeah, you're right.
You know, there's something I've noticed about the amateurs who misidentify things, about the naturalists who misidentify things, about the naturalists who correctly identify things, about the specialists like yourself. There's something I've noticed about a great many of them. I'm talking 95 to 98% of them. I don't mean any offense here, but the thing I've noticed is how many of them aren't insane. What is going on there? I mean, that speaks to something here more than anything else, is that they're just people. It's very strange. It's very strange for me. In a lot of other disciplines, if you want to call them that, it doesn't take long before you're hiding the sharp edges, but not, right, not with the people you're talking about, whether they're professional or otherwise. That, to me, that is a strong but unexamined component of whether or not there is something to this, is that the people who are talking about it, the endless, I mean, you have a famous map at the center, right? That has red pins for the stories that you think are credible.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a couple of famous maps, actually. So there's that one, which is our map. We have two maps it's in the gift shop, actually, because that's where everybody comes in. And it's a bunch of pins from people that have reported sightings to us, and we deemed them credible enough and invited them to put a pin on the board. And it's also only sightings. It's not footprints, it's not sounds, it's not misidentifications. They saw a Sasquatch, there's nothing else it could be, and we believe them, you know? And so like that one I was talking about with the guy that was, you know, freaking out over Murphy over here, his pin's up there. My pin is up there, but I put it up there myself, you know, because it's like, oh yeah, I work here, I can make that decision.
You didn't give yourself a hard time.
But
what about the contingent of, there's one other contingent here that must cause a problem. What about the seasoned woodsmen who've been going out with their dogs, with their guns for years, decades, maybe even generationally, and who say, no, No, I've been out there the whole time. Never any sounds, never any scat, which they bring up a lot. But I've never seen any indication of anything other than what I already know exists. How do you respond to people who they might not have anthropological knowledge, but they definitely know the woods. They definitely know the area.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I know quite a few people that are like that.
These animals are rare and wary.
Yes, they're rare, they're wary. And I mean, if we're talking about something I should bring up about them being wary, there's kind of this misconception. It's another what's the word I'm looking for? It's another misinformation thing. I'm failing on the word because it's early and yeah, you know.
You got a whole day of this stuff ahead of you.
These wow, I can't talk all of a sudden. I'm so sorry. The seasoned woods people that come in, I've been out there for my entire life and I've never seen anything. Yes, it's because they're rare animals. It's because they're wary. That's what I was talking about. They're wary. They're not hiding from people. There's the misconception. That's the word I was looking for. The misconception that they're hiding from people because they know what people do, right? Maybe there's some of them that do, but it comes down to their biology. It comes down to how they eat, comes down to how they live. Sasquatches are omnivores. They are ambush predators. They've been seen taking deer and elk. They are hiding for the same reasons that cougars do it. Cougars are always hiding because both of them are ambush predators. If you are always in a hidden position, when an opportunity arises, you're that much more ready for that opportunity to take it, you know? So they're hiding all the time so that they're always ready to survive. An animal out in the wild does not know when its next meal is going to be. I like to use dogs and coyotes as a really good example. So put, point A and point B, and both the dog and the coyote start at point A, and the dog goes first, right? And the dog runs all over the place and goes and checks everything out because it's having a great time. And then by the end of the day, it goes and has the meal because it knows it's going to have it at the end of the day. The coyote does not know that it's going to have it at the end of the day. And the coyote goes from point A to point B, right? No stops in between. It knows where to go and it figures it out and it gets there, right? And that's energy conservation. And it's one of my favorite things to talk about when I'm doing tracking classes. It's because it's easy to see. There's a lot of people in places with their dogs, and there's a lot of coyotes in places. So they're often right next to each other for those comparisons. Sasquatches are the same way. They're going to conserve energy. They're always going to be ready for an opportunity when it arises. And there you go. So they're always hidden. Now, why are people not seeing them? Well, go back to that number. Maybe 300 in Oregon. I don't know about other states because I haven't done the math for it, but maybe 300 in Oregon alone. Spread those out over a long distance, put in that factor of them being really, really sneaky, and put in the fact that most people aren't going to see the things they're not looking for. That's another thing that happens in my tracking classes. One of the places I would go out to, there's tons of elk tracks, but nobody would see them until I was like, hey, here's an elk track. And suddenly the forest lights up with elk tracks. So if you're not looking for something, you're not going to find it, There's a lot of hunters that have come in and said that, like, oh, I've been in the woods my entire life. I've never seen anything. And then we go, okay, well, what else? Has anything else weird happened in the woods? And then sometimes we get people going, oh yeah, well, I saw this weird bear once. It had shoulders.
And part of your response to someone saying, well, two really well-known ambush predators in the United States are rattlesnakes and cougars, and we have plenty of film footage of both of them in the wild. Right. Part of your response to that would be that film footage like that does exist, and the public just a person might have perfectly clear footage of such a thing and say, no way, I don't want the world news camped on my front doorstep for the next year. No way. I'm showing it to you, but I'm not sure. I don't want it shown to the world.
Yeah, it's the stigma. It all comes back to the stigma. And so as soon as there is some sort of academic recognition of these animals and it suddenly becomes okay to talk about this, There's going to be a lot of stuff out there for people to see. And honestly, I still say be skeptical. Be very skeptical about this stuff. There's also, like, yes, we're running a museum. There's no money in this. There's no money in this, which is one of the things that people always say, like, oh, yeah, people are hoaxing things, so they make millions of dollars, you know? And it's like, no. Paul Freeman, the guy that filmed that "Oh, there he goes" video, he basically lost all of his money because of it. Same with Roger Patterson. Bob Gimlin, the other guy for the Patterson-Gimlin film, he was ridiculed for years and never made a dime off of it. In fact, actually, he made like $50 off of it because he sold the rights to it so people would stop bothering him.
Well, I always said,
like,
I always wanted to say to people, if you think that Patterson and Gimlin were hoaxers, then you never met Gimlin.
Right.
Spend 5 minutes talking to him. He is absolute salt of the earth. He would not lie about his bank balance, much less
right.
he saw on film.
Yeah. And like, here is a really good example, because like, yeah, we make money here because we have a gift shop, right? But like, I make enough to pay the bills, and I have to go work my other paleontology stuff to get extra money to do things. Like, I make just enough to survive here. I don't make a lot of money. Neither does Cliff. Neither does our other employees here. Neither does the other owner, Melissa. Our goal here is education, not making money. And we're never going to make money off of this place. And we're okay with that. We're just trying to educate and do science.
But no, I agree with all this. It's not a gotcha at the very last minute. No, but if a pair of campers came into your driveway and brought in a knapsack and said, "I've got something to show you," and they unzipped it, and it was an infant Sasquatch, alive and confused, you would make a lot of money. I would think you would make a lot of money.
I won't disagree with that. That might happen. Well, they would make a lot of money because they were the ones that found it. We would probably direct them into the direction of where to go. Like, hey, we should go to Idaho and go to Dr. Jeff Meldrum and do this, or we should go to the local zoo so we can take care of it and make sure it stays alive while we do all of our stuff.
Or the American Museum of Natural History, which would cut you
or that
$5 million. But we're almost out of time. Before we finish up, I have so many more questions. You'll just have to come back. I've got so many more questions that I want to ask. But before we finish up, could you give everybody one last reminder about the center?
Yeah. So North American Bigfoot Center, located in Boring, Oregon. Come on in, say hi. I'll be here. Ask your questions. Yeah, we've got our website, NorthAmericanBigfootCenter.com. There you can see our membership. You can email us. You can do whatever you want. And maybe I'll answer your question.